You know that old saying, good fences make good neighbors? It's built on the idea that we can trust the people we share a wall with, the ones we might borrow a cup of sugar from. We see them every day, a familiar face in a familiar place. It's a silent agreement of mutual respect and hopefully distance. We build our lives just feet away from theirs, assuming that the drywall or the stretch of lawn between us is enough to keep us safe. But sometimes, the most terrifying threats are the ones living right next door. The ones who watch from behind their curtains, listening, waiting. Tonight, we're counting down 8 unsettling accounts of neighborly nightmares that prove you never truly know who you're living next to. These stories come from people who thought their homes were their sanctuaries, only to find the real horror was closer than they could ever imagine. Our first story takes us to a quiet apartment complex in Louisville, Kentucky, where a new tenant discovered his neighbor's friendly welcome was just a mask for something monstrous. Story 1: The Dismemberment Neighbor. This first account was submitted by a man named Mark, who had just moved into what he thought was a perfect apartment. It was affordable, close to his job, and the complex itself seemed peaceful. The first few weeks were totally uneventful. He'd exchanged pleasantries with other tenants, including the man in the apartment directly next to his. He thought the neighbor seemed a bit off, maybe a little intense. But Mark just chalked it up to social awkwardness. The guy was quiet and kept to himself, which, let's be honest, is often the best kind of neighbor. The trouble started with the noises. Late one Tuesday night, Mark was woken up by a series of heavy thumps against their shared wall. It sounded like someone was moving heavy furniture, dragging it across the floor with a huge amount of effort. This was followed by a rhythmic wet chopping sound that went on for what felt like hours. Mark tried to ignore it, pulling a pillow over his head and telling himself his neighbor was just doing some bizarre late-night DIY project. But a deep, sick feeling of unease settled in his stomach. The sounds were just unnatural, visceral. The next day, Mark saw his neighbor by the mailboxes. He tried to make a casual joke about the late-night redecorating, but the man just stared at him. Mark said his neighbor's eyes were wide, almost unblinking, with a frantic, primal energy that sent a shiver down his spine. The man didn't say a word. He just gave a slight, unnerving smile before turning and walking away. That look, Mark wrote, was the look of a man who had crossed a line and didn't care who knew it. That night, the noises returned, but this time it was a dragging sound, a heavy scraping noise that moved from the apartment, down the hallway, and toward the building's back exit, which led to a small wooded area near some train tracks. Mark was frozen in his bed, too afraid to even look out his peephole. He kept trying to convince himself it was nothing, that he was overreacting, but he couldn't shake the feeling of pure dread. The next morning, the complex was swarming with police cars and news vans. Yellow tape cordoned off his neighbor's apartment and a section of the woods behind the building. The details started to come out throughout the day, each one more horrific than the last. The neighbor had murdered his girlfriend inside the apartment. The noises Mark had heard, the thumping, the chopping, were the sounds of her dismemberment. The dragging noise was the man hauling her remains in bags, trying to get rid of them near the train tracks. The groundskeeper later told residents that the scene inside the apartment was the worst thing he'd ever witnessed. Mark moved out a week later, unable to sleep, haunted by the sounds that came through the wall and the memory of that primal, wide-eyed look. He learned that the boundary between a normal life and a waking nightmare is sometimes no thicker than a layer of plaster and paint. Story 2: The Parolee Stalker. Our next account comes from a family who learned that a new neighbor's past can have a terrifying impact on the present. It all started when a woman moved into the house next door with her adult son, Rick. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with families, and the newcomers just didn't seem to fit. Rick, a man in his late 30s, had a gaunt, restless look about him. He would stand on his front lawn for hours, just staring, not at anything in particular, just in the general direction of the surrounding houses. The family who submitted this story, we'll call them the Millers, soon learned from another neighbor that Rick was on parole. His criminal record included theft and assault. This knowledge immediately put them on edge. Their unease grew when Rick's behavior became more targeted. Mrs. Miller would be gardening in her backyard and look up to find Rick standing perfectly still on his lawn, his eyes fixed on her. He never waved, never smiled. He just watched. Soon he began testing boundaries. He'd be seen at the edge of their property line late at night. Then he started walking up their driveway to peer into the windows of their parked cars. The Millers installed security cameras which only confirmed what they already feared. The footage showed Rick circling their house in the dead of night, his face lit up by the motion-activated security lights. The real terror began when things started to go missing from inside their home. It was small things at first, things they thought they'd just misplaced. A set of fine china from a display cabinet, a few framed family photos from the mantelpiece. They couldn't figure out how anyone was getting in. They were so careful about locking their doors and windows. They felt like they were going crazy, gaslit by an invisible intruder. The climax came on a Saturday evening. The Millers were having a family dinner with Mrs. Miller's father, who was visiting. Through the kitchen window, they saw a figure moving in the backyard. It was Rick. He had slipped through the back gate after silently untwisting the simple wire latch holding it shut. He was walking slowly toward the back door of the house. Mrs. Miller's father didn't hesitate. He was a man in his 60s, but still strong and fiercely protective. He burst out the back door and confronted Rick, yelling at him to get off the property. Rick didn't answer with words. He lunged. A desperate struggle erupted on the lawn. Inside, Mrs. Miller was on the phone with 911, screaming for help as she watched her father wrestle with the man who had been tormenting her family for months. Police arrived within minutes and subdued Rick. When they searched him, his pockets were empty. But when they searched his room at his mother's house, they found everything. The stolen family photos were arranged on his nightstand. The fine china was stacked neatly in his closet. He had been sneaking into their house for weeks, stealing pieces of their life, of their memories. He was arrested and, thanks to the parole violation and new charges, was sent back to prison. The Millers reinforced every lock on their property, but the sense of security they once had was stolen for good. Story 3. The Obsessive Neighbor. We all share parts of our lives online, but we get to choose what to share. We curate our own image. So what happens when that choice is stolen from you? When someone you barely know decides they have a right to every single moment of your life? This next account, from a group of tenants in a California apartment complex called Willow Court, is a modern horror story about surveillance. The man's name was Brandon. He lived in a corner unit on the 3rd floor and was, by all accounts, a ghost. No one ever saw him with friends or saw him come and go from work. He was just there, a blank face in the hallway. The story's narrator, a young woman named Chloe, lived down the hall. Like most people in the building, she and her roommate didn't give him a second thought. The first hint that something was wrong was when Chloe's roommate started getting bizarre, anonymous messages online. Someone using a fake profile was sending her details about her life that no stranger could know. What time she left for her morning run, the brand of protein powder she used, a joke she told Chloe in the supposed privacy of their own living room. They tried to brush it off as a weird but harmless prank. Maybe someone had overheard them. But the incidents escalated. Other tenants started experiencing similar things. One man found a note under his door that referenced a confidential work call he'd made in his home office. A couple on the 2nd floor received an email detailing their arguments, almost word for word. A cloud of paranoia fell over Willow Court. Residents stopped talking in the hallways and started eyeing each other with suspicion. Everyone felt like they were being watched, because they were. The truth was discovered by complete accident. A maintenance worker was replacing a faulty smoke detector in the apartment of one of the targeted tenants. As he twisted the old detector off its ceiling mount, he noticed something strange. Tucked inside the plastic casing was a tiny black lens, a pinhole camera. Panic ripped through the building. The police were called, and they searched the common areas and several apartments. They found cameras everywhere, hidden in smoke detectors, inside laundry room vents, behind emergency lights in the stairwells, and even in the carport light fixtures. Every single camera was wired to a central receiver. The investigation quickly led to the one person who seemed to be at the center of nothing: Brandon. When police entered his apartment, they found a normal-looking living space. but the electronics were anything but standard. A powerful computer system was linked to multiple external hard drives containing thousands of hours of footage, documenting his neighbors' lives in excruciating detail. He had logs of their workout schedules, their eating habits, even their social media activity, which he cross-referenced with his surveillance. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't in his apartment. Brandon was also renting a storage unit a few miles away. When police opened it, they found what they could only describe as a command center. A wall of monitors showed live feeds from not just Willow Court, but from at least 2 other apartment complexes in the area. He had been running a massive, illegal surveillance operation for years. Brandon was arrested, and the tenants of Willow Court, whose most private moments had been stolen and cataloged, all moved out. They could no longer see their homes as a place of safety, but as a stage for an unwilling performance. Story 4. The Haunted House on Millionaires Row. We often think of nightmares happening in dark, run-down places. But this next story comes from one of the most beautiful historic districts in the country. Old Louisville, in Kentucky. It's a neighborhood famous for its stunning Victorian mansions, a place often called Millionaires Row. It's also known for something else. Many call it the most haunted neighborhood in America. This account comes directly from a man who documented its paranormal side, author David Domine. Back in 1999, Domine, who described himself as a skeptic at the time, bought a magnificent, sprawling Victorian home on 3rd Street. He knew about the neighborhood's spooky reputation, but dismissed it as local folklore, charming stories to tell tourists. Even when the previous owner told him the house was haunted by a mischievous poltergeist named Lucy, he didn't take it seriously. He was simply in love with the architecture. According to Domine, however, the house seemed determined to make a believer out of him. The strange phenomena began subtly. He'd be home alone and hear distinct, disembodied footsteps walking across the floorboards of the empty rooms above him. He tried to rationalize it as the old house settling, the groans of old wood. Then came the smells. A strong scent of cigar smoke would suddenly fill a room, even though no one smoked, and then vanish just as quickly. Domine wrote about how his skepticism was slowly chipped away by the unexplainable events in his home. One night, the activity went beyond sounds and smells. He reported that while working in his study, every single book on one of his shelves suddenly flew off and crashed to the floor, as if swiped by an invisible hand. There was no earthquake, no passing truck. To him, it felt deliberate and violent. As he started talking to his neighbors, he realized his house wasn't an anomaly. It seemed like everyone on Millionaires Row had a story. People spoke of seeing apparitions in their windows, hearing ghostly parties in empty ballrooms, and of objects moving on their own. The stories were all different, but they all shared a common thread of living alongside spirits who seemed to have never left their grand homes. Intrigued and no longer a skeptic, Domine began to formally research and document these accounts. His work led to several books and ghost tours that explore the haunted history of old Louisville, from haunted churches to spooky street corners. He moved into the neighborhood looking for a beautiful home, but what he found was a community where the past isn't just remembered, it's an active and often terrifying resident. His story is a chilling reminder that some neighbors never move away. They just wait for the new owners to arrive. Story 5. The Gray Man Apparition. Our exploration of old Louisville's ghostly residents doesn't end there. The neighborhood is a tapestry of paranormal accounts, and this next one, shared by a family who lived just a few blocks from Millionaires Row, is especially unsettling. This family's experience wasn't with a mischievous spirit, but with a presence that felt far more menacing. The story comes from a woman named Kristen, who moved into the top floor of a converted Victorian duplex with her husband. The first few months were peaceful. They loved the historic charm of the apartment, its tall ceilings and ornate woodwork. The first encounter happened on a sunny afternoon. Kristen was walking from the kitchen into the living room when she saw him. Standing near the far wall was the figure of a man. She described him as being made of gray smoke or shadow, but with a distinct, solid shape. A man wearing an old-fashioned suit. She froze, her heart hammering. The figure turned its head towards her, and then simply vanished as it took a step forward. She tried to convince herself her eyes were playing tricks on her, that it was just the light. But the sightings continued. Her husband saw the gray man, as they started calling him, standing in their bedroom doorway late one night, a silent, imposing silhouette. They would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of their eyes, a fleeting shadow, there one moment and gone the next. While the sightings were unnerving, the presence soon turned from passive to aggressive. The family reported feeling a heavy, dense pressure in certain rooms, as if the air itself was being crushed. They began to experience bouts of sleep paralysis, waking up unable to move, with the terrifying sensation of a dark mass pressing down on them. The most horrifying incident they reported involved their small dog. Kristen was in the living room when the dog suddenly started barking and growling at an empty corner. Its hackles were raised, and it was trembling with a mix of fear and aggression. Before Kristen could react, she says the dog was lifted into the air by an unseen force. It yelped in pain as it was thrown across the room, slamming hard against the opposite wall. Kristen screamed and rushed to her pet, which was whimpering but thankfully not seriously injured. That was the last straw. A silent apparition was one thing, a violent physical attack was another. They contacted local paranormal investigators, who later claimed to have recorded high electromagnetic field readings and disembodied voices responding to their questions. The family couldn't live with the constant fear. They broke their lease and moved out, leaving the gray man to his solitary haunting of the top-floor apartment. Their story became another chilling piece of old Louisville folklore, a warning that not all spirits are content to just remain in the shadows. Story 6. The Poltergeist Neighbor. Most paranormal stories involve a single haunted house, a place with a dark history that anchors spirits to it. But what if the activity wasn't confined to one location? What if it could bleed through the walls and affect two homes at once? This next account comes from a family who came to believe the source of their haunting wasn't their house, but the house next door. The submitter, a man named Tom, lived with his wife and two young children in a modern suburban duplex. It was a new development, no long, tragic history to speak of. Their lives were perfectly normal until the family next door moved out and a new woman, a quiet, single woman in her 50s, moved in. Shortly after she settled in, Tom's family began experiencing strange things. It started with noises. They would hear faint whispers that seemed to come from inside their own walls. At night, they'd hear what sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth in their attic, even though it was sealed and used only for storage. They tried to ignore it, blaming the sounds on the house settling or pipes clanking. But the activity grew bolder. Objects started moving on their own. One morning, Tom's wife was in the kitchen and watched as a coffee mug slid slowly across the counter and shattered on the floor. The children's toys would turn on by themselves in the middle of the night, filling the house with eerie electronic music. The family was getting terrified. They felt besieged in their own home and had no idea why it was happening. One evening, while taking out the trash, Tom saw his new neighbor in her driveway. She looked exhausted and distressed. On a whim, he decided to ask her if she'd been experiencing any strange noises, trying to sound casual, like he was concerned about plumbing or pests. The woman's reaction was immediate. Her eyes welled up with tears, and a look of immense relief washed over her face. "You hear it too?" she whispered. She invited him inside, and the two neighbors compared experiences. Her stories mirrored theirs almost exactly. The whispers, the footsteps, objects moving on their own. She told Tom she believed something had followed her to the house. She'd been experiencing poltergeist-like activity for years, but it had become much more intense since she moved into the duplex. It seemed the entity, whatever it was, wasn't just tied to her, but was now active in both adjoining homes. The shared wall of the duplex acted like a conduit. Knowing they weren't crazy was a small comfort, but the situation was unbearable. Paranormal investigators were called in and later reported finding significant electromagnetic disturbances and unexplainable voices in both homes at the same time. They suggested a spiritual cleansing, but the activity would only stop for a few days before returning. The neighbor, unable to bear it any longer, eventually decided to move out. She felt guilty, believing she was the source of the terror Tom's family was experiencing. The day she left, a strange calm settled over the duplex. The whispers stopped. The footsteps in the attic went silent. Objects stopped moving. The haunting was over. Tom and his family never learned what happened to their former neighbor, but they never forgot the year they spent living next to a poltergeist. Story 7. The property manager's sister college dorms are supposed to be safe. A home away from home where your biggest worries are exams and noisy roommates. But for one student in California, his dorm room became the site of a terrifying and violent attack, orchestrated by someone who should have never been there in the first place. This account was submitted by a student we'll call Alex. Alex lived in a large off-campus student housing complex. The building had a live-in property manager, a man in his 40s who seemed friendly enough. The rules were strict: no unauthorized guests overnight, and every room required a key. One night, Alex was studying late. It was after 2 a.m., and the building was quiet. He heard a soft fumbling at his door, followed by the distinct click of a key turning in the lock. He froze. His roommate was out of town, and no one else had a key. Before he could even call out, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a woman he had never seen before. She was thin, with matted hair and a completely blank, emotionless expression. Her eyes were dark and vacant. In her right hand, she held a large kitchen knife. Time seemed to slow down as Alex's mind struggled to process what was happening. The woman took a step into the room, raising the knife slightly. There was no sound, no threat, just a silent, terrifying advance. Instinct and adrenaline kicked in. Alex kicked his chair back and scrambled away from his desk, putting as much distance as he could between them. He yelled, "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman didn't answer. She just kept coming, her pace slow and deliberate. Her silence was more terrifying than any scream. Seeing that she was blocking the only exit, Alex did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the heaviest textbook from his desk and hurled it at her. It struck her in the shoulder, making her stumble for just a second. It was the opening he needed. He charged past her, grabbing her wrist and using his momentum to slam her against the doorframe. The knife clattered to the floor. Alex was bigger and stronger, and he managed to wrestle her to the ground, pinning her and yelling for help. Other students, woken by the commotion, poured into the hallway, and someone called the police. When the officers arrived, the woman was still on the floor, limp and unresponsive. She wouldn't speak or give her name. The key to Alex's room was in her pocket. The mystery was solved when the property manager showed up, his face pale with shock. The woman was his sister. He admitted that she had severe, untreated mental health issues, and he had been letting her live secretly in an empty room down the hall. He had given her a master key in case of an emergency. He never imagined she would use it to enter a student's room and attack them. The property manager was immediately fired and arrested for criminal negligence. His sister was committed to a psychiatric facility. Alex moved out of the dorm the next day, the illusion of safety completely shattered. He had been attacked in a locked room by a stranger who had a key, a ghost in the machine of the building, his security, proving that sometimes the greatest dangers come from the people who hold all the keys. Story 8. The Cursed Apartment. Our final story takes us to the bustling heart of New York City, a place where millions of lives are lived in vertical stacks of apartments. In a city that dense, your neighbors are just on the other side of a wall, a ceiling, a floor. You hear their arguments, smell their cooking, and sometimes you might just inherit their ghosts. This account was sent in by a woman named Maya, who thought she'd found the perfect apartment in the East Village. It was a pre-war building with tons of character, and the rent was surprisingly affordable for the area. There was just one catch, which the landlord only mentioned after she signed the lease. The previous tenant had passed away in the apartment under mysterious circumstances. Maya, a practical person, wasn't fazed. In a city as old as New York, she figured people have probably passed away in most apartments. She moved in, and for the first month, everything was fine. Then, the strange occurrences began. She started hearing noises at night. Not the typical groans of an old building, but distinct, intelligent sounds. She'd hear a single soft knock on her bedroom door when she was home alone. She'd hear what sounded like a man's heavy sigh coming from the living room when the apartment was empty. Then she started seeing things. A fleeting, shadowy figure in her peripheral vision, standing at the end of the long hallway that connected the living room to the bedroom. Whenever she'd turn to look, it would be gone. She felt a constant, oppressive sensation of being watched, especially in that hallway. The air there was always cold, and her cat, normally a brave animal, refused to walk down it, hissing at the empty space. Deeply unsettled, Maya started doing some research. What she found was horrifying. The mysterious circumstances of the previous tenant's death was that he had taken his own life in the very hallway she was now terrified of. Digging deeper, she discovered that he wasn't the first. Over the past 50 years, at least 3 other tenants of that specific apartment had died under violent or unexplained circumstances. Another suicide, a fatal fall from the window, and one person who had simply disappeared. The apartment didn't just have a history, it felt like it had a body count. It was as if the space itself was cursed, a magnet for tragedy and despair. The shadow she kept seeing, the knocking, the sighs, she became convinced it was the collective energy of the lives that had ended there. The final straw came one night when she was woken from a dead sleep by the sound of her own name being whispered directly into her ear. She shot up in bed, drenched in a cold sweat. The room was empty. The air was still. But the voice had been as clear as if someone had been standing right beside her. She packed a bag that night and stayed at a friend's. She never spent another night in that apartment. She broke her lease and lost her security deposit. But she didn't care. It was a small price to pay to escape the cursed apartment in the East Village. She learned that some neighbors are more permanent than others. Their stories forever etched into the walls of the place you are trying to call home. The line between a safe home and a neighborly nightmare is terrifyingly thin. These accounts remind us that behind any closed door could be a story of criminal obsession or a haunting that defies all explanation. The familiar faces we pass every day might just be hiding the darkest secrets. We're left to wonder about the people we share our walls with, and the histories that linger in the spaces we now call home. Thanks for joining us for these chilling tales. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more unsettling stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness. And if you have your own story about a neighborly nightmare, we want to hear it. Send your scary story to the email in the description below for a chance to have it featured on a future episode. You never know, your experience could become someone else's favorite nightmare. Stay safe, and whatever you do, be careful who you borrow sugar from.